Welcome to the training session on the closeout process for program directors of Cohort 16 of the 21st Century Grant. This presentation has been designed to guide you through the essential steps, guidelines, forms, and procedures that are crucial for successfully completing the closeout process. As program directors, it is your responsibility to carefully review and adhere to the requirements outlined in this presentation. Please note that all viewers are required to sign in at the beginning using the QR code. Furthermore, to confirm full participation, you will be expected to complete a QR code at the end of the presentation to ensure that the presentation has been thoroughly viewed. To assist you further, questions regarding the process will be addressed during the designated virtual office hours on April the 15th. You may choose to attend either the 9:30 session, the 3:30 p.m. session, or both. Additionally, questions can be directed to one of the 21st Century ALSDE specialists in federal programs for further clarification. Please take notes, remain attentive to the detailed instructions provided throughout, and utilize the available opportunities to ensure a smooth and compliant closeout process. Now, let's begin. Using the QR code, please sign in at this time for this session. Today's purpose is for the program director to comprehend the compliance process required for closing out the 21st Century Grant. Before we get started, we do want to make sure that you understand the terminology that you will see throughout the presentation. So when you hear any of the words reference to grantee, we're talking about the State Department of Education, and the grantee for the 21st Century Grant is Alabama. When we reference subgrantee, that is the actual holder of the grant, which is sometimes the LEA or the CBO. LEA, Local Educational Agency; CBO, Community-Based Organization. When we reference program director, the program director is the head of operations and also serves as the liaison between the subgrantee, which is the LEA or CBO, and the grantee, which is the Alabama State Department of Education. Let's move right into talking about our process. There are 3 steps to the process that mostly tells you exactly what our closeout procedures are with the 21st Century Grant. Step 1 basically is just describing an email that's going to be sent to the program directing announcing the closeout of Cohort 16's grant, and you'll also receive a calendar that has been updated to reflect an April 7th date on the document that shows you exactly what is being expected as far as documents to go to the LSDE specialist, which is assigned to you, or documents that should be going to your TA that is assigned to you, as well as your site visit. And we'll get more details about that later. The next step is dealing with forms. There is a written narrative that has to be submitted to your ALSD specialist that I mentioned earlier by a specific due date. But all other forms and checklists, they are to be completed by the program director and must be submitted to the TA, your assigned TA, by the deadline date that has been identified in the calendar. But it must be completed before your site visit. Signatures that are required on those forms will not be obtained until the actual site visit. So please keep that in mind. The biggest thing we just want you to understand is that those forms need to be completed and the narrative needs to be done before the site visit. That's a part of the process. So if there's any feedback that needs to be given for corrections, it can be done before the site visit, and we don't want to make the site visit long, especially if you have multiple sites. So that's the rationale for having everything done prior to your actual site visit. For step three, which is one of the major components to this grant, is the checklist or the review of inventory. So any equipment that was purchased using cohort 16 funds will be reviewed. The inventory forms will have to be emailed before the site visit, and the TA will utilize those forms to prepare as part of their visit. Now, do understand that the inventory form is used to not only just view the equipment that has been identified that was purchased only with cohort 16 funds, but it's also the opportunity for the TA to come in and address and make sure that equipment has been labeled appropriately. And when they do come, they will come to look at each site that is housing any equipment, and they're going to select three different pieces of equipment from the inventory list that you will have submitted to them through your email, and they'll let you know what those pieces are the day that they are there. It will not be predetermined before they come. And they're also going to match whatever listed equipment that is on that form with paid invoices. So make sure you have all of that together once they arrive. But that's very, very important. And so those are the three main steps as far as when it comes to the closeout process that we're going to be expected when we're closing out cohort 16. Like we mentioned earlier, you will receive a notification through email that will give you all of the information that is needed in order for you to be prepared for your closeout process. I do want to make mention that if you have any issues with the dates, it is very important that the program director contacts the assigned TA to get that straightened out. We do not want this to be a hard process, and so we want to be proactive in providing notification in a way that you will be prepared and ready for your process. Now we're going to talk about the written narrative, which is information that's going to be emailed to your assigned ALSDE specialist that is identified on the calendar that you have received, and we will take that narrative and review it and provide you with feedback. But within that narrative, there are 5 things that you're going to discuss, and then at the very end of providing the information for the narrative, you're going to make sure that you have signed off of it as the program director to show that it is accurate and that you have completed that process. So within the body of the narrative, you're going to discuss the relevancy of the records, how all of those things are maintained and stored. You're going to talk about the equipment, how it's purchased, what your process is at each site. You're going to also talk about equipment if it is broken and needs to be disposed of. What is your process that you have in place? And then you're also going to talk about your processes when it comes to loss and prevention. And so number 5 is a new one for us. We have not um, done this before in the past, but moving forward, we are expected to address loss and prevention. And so please note that we're going to go into more detail of how that process looks on the next slide. Now we're ready to go into what those closeout instructions look like. Hopefully you will have downloaded this particular document so that you can be able to go through the document with me as I look at this information for you to be able to understand what exactly it is that is needed when you're going through your closeout. All right, let's look at the first document we want to review to make sure that you do understand the process for closing out. If you noticed on the document, there are 2 specific areas that are going to be addressed. The first area that we're going to look at is dealing with items submitted to the assigned ALSD specialist. This is the narrative that I made reference to earlier when we were talking about the 3 steps. Now, when you're going to do your narrative, there are some specific areas that must be addressed. So let's look at number 1. You're going to be specific in identifying relevant records, reports, or files, documents that are going to be stored and maintained. What does that look like? You're going to give a description of how that's going to look, where the documents will be housed. Be very specific. We want to make sure we refrain from words from just saying at the school. Give us the name of the school, the room number of where those things are housed, or if you say in the school's office, where in the school office is it going to be? In a file cabinet? Is it going to be in a box identified as 21st century that's in a storage room in the office, that type of thing. So we want to make sure that when you answer number one, that you give us very good, clear understanding of how you're going to make sure those relevant records are housed and maintained um, for cohort 16. If you decide that you're going to house it at a specific school, please identify the school. If you are a CBO, you want to talk about if you're going to house the information at your business, you need to identify the name of the business. I would even include the address because keep in mind your narrative is being used for auditing purposes from the state level as well as the federal level. And we want to make sure that we have um, a good explanation of everything that we did in order to close out federal funds for cohort 16. So now let's move on to number two. We really want to talk about how was the equipment that was purchased with cohort 16 funds was handled. And it gives you three options. However, if you did not purchase any equipment the entire time using cohort 16 funds, then you need to say that in number two. But if you did, then there are some options that you will fall within when it's time to talk about how you're going to handle the equipment because you are closing out cohort 16 21st century funds. So if you did purchase some equipment, here's your first option. If you have equipment that was purchased with the grant and you are now going to be awarded, you know that you're going to be awarded the new cohort for 21st century grant, then you would say that. You would actually say in number two, the program um, will continue because we were newly awarded the 21st century grant for cohort 25 for the summer or cohort 26 for the academic year. If that does not fit you for that part of option one, then you look at the other one, part of option one that says or you're going to have a non 21st century out of school time program, meaning if you have some sort of after school program or out of school time program that's going to be housed at this particular school site that is a 21st century site, then you then want to say that. So you're going to say you all will have a non 21st century out of school time program and that the grantee will retain the equipment or the subgrantee will retain the equipment that has been purchased with 21st century funds for ongoing propagation of the program. So you just want to make sure that you don't just say you fit option one in your narrative. You're going to actually copy and paste the parts of option one that is pertaining to you. Now, I do want you to note that because you see option one, if you go down to the bottom where it says in the narrative, identify how the equipment will be handled, then if your option one fits you, then you're going to do number A. So let's look at number A. Right there in parentheses, it says to identify really the 21st century site's name. We don't want you to keep the parentheses and we don't want you to keep the wording as you see it in this document. That's for you to fill in that information. So if the name of my school is ABC, then I'm going to say ABC 21st century site has been awarded another 21st century grant. But if I was not awarded another 21st century grant, I'm going to identify option one and I'm going to then go to where it says after the or, ABC 21st century site will continue as an out of school time program funded through. I must identify the funding source. Is it going to be funded with local funds? Is it going to be funded with state funds? Is it going to be funded through Title I funds or whatever funding, another grant? But you must identify the funding source that's going to continue to operate that program. So that's what you would put in parentheses, the funding source, and the equipment will remain at the school for continued use with out of school time programming. So if you notice, option one matches with A. It just depends on your need. Now, if you happen to be a school, I'm sorry, a subgrantee that had several sites, and maybe out of 3 sites, 2 of them were awarded and one was not, then you need to identify each one of those sites and tell how each one of them will handle the equipment if they purchased equipment and is housed on this site and they fit option one. So just keep in mind for those of you who have multiple sites, you have to think about where the equipment is and if which option fits them. Now let's look at option two. If the equipment will not be used to continue an out of school time program at the site, it must be transferred to another 21st century program within the site's LEA. So that means I'm not going to have a 21st century program and I'm not going to have any type of out of school time program at my site. But guess what? There's another 21st century program within my LEA of where the site is. If I'm a CBO, you have to look at the LEA of which the sites are currently housed, and if there's another 21st century program. If that is the case, for example, if you have if you are a subgrantee that has cohort 16 and 17, and 16 did not receive the grant, and 16 is not going to have another out of school time program, then you are to transfer um, 16's equipment to cohort 17 if it is within the site's LEA. If the school that is cohort 16 and cohort 17 is within the same LEA, then that's when you would transfer it to that LEA. Okay? If that is your situation, then for option two, you're going to look at letter B, which is there will not be another out of school time program at. You want to put in the name of the 21st century site, and we'll just say ABC 21st century site, but there is another 21st century site, and you're going to name that school, which is XYZ 21st century site. And let's just say both schools are in Montgomery County, then we will say in Montgomery County, and equipment will be transferred to that 21st century program. Okay, now let's go back and let's look at option three. If there is no other 21st century site within the LEA, the equipment may remain at the site if it is a Title I school, or it may be transferred to another Title I school within the LEA. Meaning, if there is not another 21st century site for me to transfer um, my equipment, to another site within the same LEA. So if I'm in Montgomery County or the site is in Montgomery County and there is not another 21st century site within Montgomery County, but ABC school is a Title I school, then the equipment can stay right there at that school and be transferred to ABC school because now it's being transferred under the umbrella of being a Title I school. However, if the 21st century site is no longer going to be a 21st century site, but there is another Title I school within the LEA, then I can transfer that equipment that is within the 21st century site that is no longer going to have a 21st century program. There is not another 21st century program at any other schools in the LEA of Montgomery County because that's where the current site is. But there is another Title I school because my school is not Title I, then I transfer that equipment to another Title I school that is within Montgomery County. If that fits your option, then you look at letter C, which states the school will not continue to have an out of school time program, and there isn't another 21st CCLC site in Montgomery County. The equipment will be retained at, and you're going to put the school's name, XYZ, to be used with its Title I program. And that's because my school is not a Title I school. But if my school is a Title I school, then I'm going to say, now, if my site is a Title I school, then I'm going to say the equipment will be retained at ABC school. So if my school was and my site was 21st Century ABC site in Montgomery County, and my school also is a Title I school, then I'm just going to say the equipment will be retained at ABC school to be used with this Title I program. All right. Now let's move on to number 3. How equipment that is broken or obsolete or no longer needed is disposed of. Here are some bulleted items that you would need to look at when you are addressing this area. We want you to keep in mind that you are responsible for the equipment from the date that it was purchased until the date of its proper disposal. And so if I were you, as like I just stated that, I probably would put that in my narrative to let auditors or anyone reading this narrative that I'm fully aware that as a subgrantee, we're responsible for the equipment that was dated during the time of cohort 16. Now it says LEA subgrantees should follow and describe their district's established guidelines for equipment disposal. So if you are an LEA subgrantee, use what your LEA has in the district for equipment disposal. But if you are a CBO or a non-LEA subgrantee, you want to describe your equipment disposal process that you have in place. But if you don't have one in place, we advise you to develop one that is aligned with the disposal process that is used by the school system in which you serve. Let's look at number 4. Provide an explanation of the site's loss and prevention process. Here are 4 bulleted areas that you want to take in consideration when you are doing this process. You want to talk about the control system that you should have in place. You want to talk about if you have any equipment that has been lost or damaged or anything that has been stolen, then you want to talk about that process. You also want to talk about if it was lost, what is the responsibility of the subgrantee to replace the item without using 21st century funds? What is the responsibility that you have in place? And then if a piece of equipment is stolen, you need to talk about how a police report should be filed. And we also wanted to make mention and make you aware that in that description or explanation, you cannot mention that students are charged to replace lost or damaged equipment. We cannot charge anything that's been lost or damaged to the students that have purchased equipment using federal funds. So keep that in mind. For number 5, we want you to sign the narrative, and it needs to be a wet signature from the program director on the narrative. And you're going to email it to your assigned ALSDE specialist for review and feedback. If there's any questions or we need more information from the state level, we will notify you and ask you to make those corrections or to add additional information. Now, that's all you need to do for the ALSDE specialist. But here we're going to talk about what needs to be submitted and then what is going to be reviewed by your assigned TA or your technical advisor. So first of all, you should know what your site visit is because we have identified when your visit will take place for the viewing of the equipment that you have purchased with cohort 16. Here are some things that we want to make sure that you are fully aware of that you would need to have. But before the visit, you want to make sure these things are completed and submitted to your TA for review before he or she comes out to the site for the closeout visit. So, number one, the closeout form. You want to make sure you have completed that. You want to also make sure that you have the equipment inventory list completed. And let's talk a little bit about that. You're only going to complete that form for equipment. You're not going to complete the form if you purchased um, equipment. I'm sorry, not equipment, but non-consumable materials and supplies. This is only for the purchases of equipment that was used in cohort 16 funds. So we shouldn't see another cohort on any of the inventory. It should only reflect cohort 16. The next thing we want to keep in mind is if a subgrantee has more than one site, you have to have a form that's kept for each site. You do not put all your purchases for all sites on one form. Each site must have its own form. So if I have 5 sites, that means I should have a form for each site. And not only will I have a form for each site, I will have three of those forms for each site to reflect years 1, 2, and 3. So site number one will have three forms because if I'm going to tell whether or not I purchased any equipment during the first year for 22-23. I'm going to have a form for year two. I'm going to have a form for year three. Now, year three, the RFA states that no purchases of equipment was to be made with the grants funds. However, if you have made purchases, we need a record of it. So, therefore, even though you didn't purchase anything because you utilized the guidelines from the RFA, then you need to say on the third um, equipment form, no purchases made during year three due to the RFA. But you cannot just not have it. You have to have documentation. So that means I'm going to have 15 different forms to reflect year one, year two, and year three, even if I did not purchase anything. That is your documentation that you are showing that you did not make any purchases. If I was just one site and I had years 1, 2, and 3. If it's only one site, that means I'm going to have 3 forms, and I'm going to talk about each one of those pieces of equipment to complete it to what it needs to be done for each one of those years. Now, in addition to having those forms for each year, you should have paid invoices that match the equipment that is on that form for each site. So you want to make sure that you have that information and you submit it to your TA because your TA, when they come out for a visit, they're going to use the inventory form and they're going to ask for pieces of equipment and then they're going to check and make sure that they see paid invoices to show that it was purchased. And we just want to make sure that you know that. And the next thing that your TA is going to be doing when they come out for the inventory process is they're going to be checking equipment to make sure that the equipment has been labeled appropriately and it should reflect 21st CCLC on it, and they're also going to check the serial number to see is the serial number matching the serial number on the inventory list. We're not looking for numbers that the district has assigned or not even the numbers that they may have with barcodes and all of that. That is not that type of a check. We're looking for the actual manufacturer's serial number that came with that product when it was purchased. And so that has to be on the form and it must match that information. Lastly, transfer of inventory form. Regardless if you transfer equipment or not, everyone is expected to complete a transfer inventory form, even if you didn't purchase any equipment. What are you going to put on the transfer inventory form then? You're just going to say no equipment was purchased, but that's your documentation that shows I completed the form and I did state that there was no purchase of equipment, therefore there was nothing to be transferred. So just note that if you have 5 sites, then that means there should be a transfer form for each site to show that the equipment that was at each one of those sites either transferred or did not transfer. So keep that in mind. Now we're going to get ready to go back into our next slide. Now that we've completed or discussed information regarding the instructions, let's go into some specific forms to make sure that you understand what is required of you. So let's look at the closeout information. As you can see, I wanted to make sure that you understood that every piece of this document that requires a signature, it must be a wet signature, not a computer generated signature. If you have this form, please take it out as we're going to go into this with details. All right, let's look at the closeout form. I think it's very self-explanatory, but for some reason there's a lot of mix-up. So please forgive me if it appears as though I'm assuming that you all are not reading. But we want to make sure that we cut back on the number of returns on this process because it is a very tedious process, and we have to make sure that we have correct information on it. So where it says subgrantee, that is the person that is the overall carrier of the grant. You only complete one form for this one. You do not complete this for each site. So this is only completed one time, regardless of the number of sites that you have. This is cohort 16, and then the next section that says site or sites of operation, you're going to identify all of the sites that fall up under the sub-grantees operations under this sub-grantee. So list all of them. If it's 5, 6, 7, you're going to list them all right here. Then the next section says program director's name. We want the name of the program director. We also want to know what is the final date of your 21st century program. When is the final date that you're going to operate as a 21st century program as a cohort 16? The date of your fiscal closeout. Give a projected date of when you know that the FER process is completed. That is talking about your ES2s. When do you expect to have those ES2s completed? That means all reimbursements for anything that has been purchased, taking care of salaries and benefits, or in any services from vendors. The last time that you need to request a, ex, a re- last time you will need to request a reimbursement for any expenditures, that's where you're going to put that date right here. And then the next section says inventory. The inventory was completed by whom? It should be the program director. And you want to make sure that you give copies of the completed inventory list to your assigned TA. So just keep that in mind as well. Your date transfer form was completed. That means what is the projected date that you expect to transfer any equipment to the school that's going to be receiving it, even if it's at the site in your Title I site, or you're going to have another 21st century program. I mean, not another 21st century program, but if you're going to have some form of out of school time, it's going to transfer to the school. What date do you expect to be able to complete this whole process? Okay, so you got to keep in mind, if you had a summer part to your program, then that means you should keep your summer in part. in mind as you're going through it. Remember, the grant doesn't end officially until September 30th. So we should see transfers taking place after that day if there's any transfers going on. And that's to include your fiscal closeout. That's to include when you know that your inventory and everything will be done. You need to have a projected date. All right. All expenses reports turned in or funds have been spent. The deadline, like I said, was September the 30th. You want to have as yes or no. So you're going to let us know when that's going to be taking place. And remember, you are cohort 16, so you will not have carryover money. So when you're looking back at that fiscal closeout, you want to make sure that when you do that FER process, you are done with all your ES2s, like I said earlier. The next area is if I'm sorry, let's go back to the all expenses reports turned in. If you don't think you're going to meet that deadline of September 30th, 2025 of all your expenses turned in and spent, if your answer is no, it's not you're not going to meet that time, we want to know when. So if no, give us a projected date of when you're going to have it completed. Okay, we're just not going to say no and not tell when we're going to do this. The next area, when will you have all your GAPRA and easy reports done? And we want to know who the person is going to be responsible for doing it. So it can be a projected date. And we want the phone number because if we run into any issues, we want to be able to contact that person, even if they're no longer working the grant, even if they're no longer at the school. If they were responsible for the GEPRA and easy reports, we want to know who that person is. We want to know the projected date of when that information is going to be completed and a good contact number. So if they have any questions about the data or any information that needs to be changed or added, we can have direct contact with that person. Also, records and documentations location. Make sure you identify specifically that we don't want to say classroom. We don't want to say the office. If we say the office, what part of the office? Is it in the secretary's office area, in the cabinet? Say that. If it's in room 213, in the cabinets, then that's what you need to say. So we want to be very specific about that when we're looking for records and documentation as it pertains to cohort 16. Now, what's your plan for inventory? You're just going to circle either 1 through 4. And this is back to what we talked about earlier. And this is in regards to your equipment. So the equipment will remain at the site and will be used with a new 21st century grant. You're going to circle 1. That means if you know that you've been awarded the new grant, that's where you would be, number 1. If you are number 2, the equipment will remain at the school because there will be an after school program. Even though it's not 21st century, you're going to have an after school program at the site, so you're going to circle number 2. If you're going to transfer equipment to another 21st century program that's within the district of the site, then you're going to do number 3. If the equipment will remain at the site because the site is a Title I school, then you're going to circle number 4. Now, what happens if you have multiple sites that may have different ways of how they're going to do their inventory? I suggest that you just put an attachment, type out each school, and identify which number is pertaining to each school when it comes to inventory. That's all you need to do because I know you can't get it all on this one page if you have multiple sites. So just note that that's the only time you would need to do anything addition with this form. But for the most part, everything hopefully will fall within one of these choices. Now, the closeout official. Right here, who is the person? They need to print their name and their 21st century title for closing out. It should be the program director. It should be the program director or someone higher than them. It should not be the lead teacher. It should not be the site coordinator unless the site coordinator is serving as the program director and site coordinator for whatever special circumstances. But the closeout official should be the program director. So, and then that person will sign and date it. The part where it says technical advisor will be completed by the your TA on the date or when they come out for the site visit. So the closeout official, all the way down to the very bottom, will be completed at the day or the date that has been identified for closeout. And the TA will identify when the closeout documents were received. I'm sorry, not the TA. ALSDE specialist will close out at the very bottom. So those last two lines, closeout documentation received, because all these documents are brought to um, the State Department and filed here in our building. So we would put the dates and then we will also sign off on it. And that's it for the closeout form. Equipment inventory list. This is a form that needs to be seriously taken in consideration when you are completing it. It should be completed for everyone, regardless if you purchased equipment or not. If you did not purchase equipment, we would need to have documentation that supports that equipment was not purchased, and you would just simply mark that on the form. Um, there are different columns within this table that need to be completed correctly. We are looking for specifics such as serial or model numbers and different things of that nature that needs to be placed on this form if any inventory or equipment was purchased. We want to make sure that you understand that in addition to completing this form, if you purchased equipment, you must have attached your information regarding inventory, equipment disposal, and loss prevention. Now, that information was indicated within your narrative that you will send to your ALSDE specialist. And so you would just simply need to attach it to this form. You don't need to reinvent or recreate anything. Those questions that addressed or those statements that address this part that deals with the equipment that has been purchased that is within your inventory, it's already been done because you submitted it to ALSDE. I strongly suggest that you submit the one to your TA that has been approved by your ALSDE specialist. So be sure that whatever you submit has been approved and not one that's still being worked on when you attach it to your inventory. So that should be completed and reviewed prior to your site visit. So let's go ahead on and get right into looking at the form. We're going to take our time because we want to make sure it's done correctly because this has not always been the case. And I want to make sure that we have a clear understanding of this process. All right, so let's go into talking about our equipment inventory form. At the very top, it says page blank of blank. We put that here because if you have multiple pieces of equipment that cannot be all placed on this form, then you would make copies of this form and then indicate that this is going to have multiple pages. And so the next page would say page two of, and if you have a total of 3 pages, then it will say page 2 of 3. If this is the first page, it's going to say page 1 of 3. So just keep that in mind as you're completing this form. Look right where it says complete as many pages as necessary for each grant year. So we're going to start off with fiscal year 2022-2023. Make sure that that is what you have for your first year. And then where it says name of subgrantee, that would be the name of the CBO or the name of the LEA. That's the actual holder of the grant. Where it says name of site, if you have multiple sites, then that means that each site must have this form completed. So you will put the name of the site that you're currently going to be discussing for inventory. Right where it says under instructions, I know it's in small print, but when I tell you, it is very important that you go through and read this because a lot of us have a tendency to just kind of scan through something and miss some very important details. And I have been guilty of that. So I want to make sure that you understand that we need you to, excuse me, to follow um, these instructions. So it says equipment purchased for community learning centers must be recorded by each site, and it's underlined, at which the equipment is located. Okay. So in addition to maintaining or updating this form as equipment is purchased, a copy of the purchase order and the paid invoices of purchase items should be kept in a file with this inventory form. So this is where we were talking about before, having your purchase order and your paid purchase order with it. This is what we're meaning because we have to show that the equipment that has been identified has been paid for using 21st century funds. Remember, the next step says all equipment must be properly labeled as 21st CCLC, not labeled just with the name of the CBO or the name of the LEA or even the school's name. But we have to have the label of 21st CCLC on there to show that that piece of property or equipment, excuse me, equipment has been purchased with federal funds. Then a narrative outlining the subgrantee's inventory process, equipment disposal process, and loss prevention process. And that has been bolded because that is something that has not been required in the past, but it is being required moving forward that should be attached to the inventory. So remember when I spoke to this in the previous slide, this is what I'm saying. So along with your inventory, you're going to make sure that you have once again, a copy of where the purchase order was paid for with invoices or the actual purchase order itself, as well as the narrative that outlines the equipment disposal process, the inventory process, and the loss prevention process. This was done when you submitted it and was approved by your ALSD E specialist. So you would just attach it with this form as well. So please note that there are several documents that are going to go with your inventory. Note, all equipment purchased with 21st century funds must be inventoried and records maintained until equipment is disposed of according to the subgrantee's equipment disposal process, regardless of the number of years a subgrantee has a 21st century grant. So all of the information that we discussed previously, here it's the why. Here is the documentation that's going to be attached to it. And remember, when we do our narrative, you only do one narrative, but it's because it's going to cover all of your equipment processes. So you're going to make sure that you attach it to the equipment inventory um, right here. Okay, so let's look at each column within the table. The description of the equipment is simply the name of the equipment. What was the name of the equipment? And it needs to match the name on your purchase order or your invoice so that there's no type of caution or target for a tag or something of that nature for us to wonder if the information is accurate or if it's been honestly completed. So if you want to make sure that that doesn't bring unnecessary attention to you, when you see the description of equipment, make sure the name of it matches the name on the purchase order or and the paid invoice. Where it says serial or model number, that is the number that is on the equipment from the merchandise creator. So you want to make sure it's not the number that an LEA assigns to it for their record keeping or the number that is assigned to it for the business of the CBO is using for record keeping. That's good for you all's records, but as far as equipment is concerned, when it comes to our level, it needs to be the serial or model number. Purchase order number. You should have a number that matches your purchase order and then the purchase order date. All of this information is going back to the purchase order and paid invoice receipt. how many of that equipment that you purchase should be listed there. So, for instance, if my first description is an iPad, then you know each iPad is going to have a different serial or model number. So, if I purchase five, I'm also going to put five as the quantity, but I'm going to have to write out purchase, each iPad number, excuse me, each iPad down because each iPad would have a different serial or model number. But I wouldn't say five for each one. The very first one would indicate that there's five, and I should find four more up under there to match the quantity in the first line that says five. When it says cost per item, if it was $199 cost per item, then that's what I put there. And if the total cost, if I multiplied and took into account whatever the taxes were for all five of those items, that would be the total cost. So I would not need to complete quantity, cost per item, and total cost for the other four iPads because I've listed it in the very first line item. Okay. Then it says location of equipment at school or site. Be very specific about where it is located. Please do not just say classroom. If it is in a classroom, it needs to say specifically the room number. If it's in the office, it needs to say specifically where in the office. Do you have a equipment room in the office? Then that's what you need to say. Equipment room in the office. If there is a door number on that equipment room in the office, then that's what you say. Then you have to identify whether or not the equipment is condition is good or if it is not good. If that equipment had to be disposed of, we need to know the disposal date and the method in which you disposed it. So make sure going all the way across, this has been done completely and it's thorough and it is accurate. At the very bottom, when it says inventory checked by, this was going to be completed by your TA. So the information that I just went over, you can complete all of that and send it, you are to complete all of that and send it to your technical advisor, your assigned TA before your site visit. Because they're going to go ahead on and look at all of this information to make sure it's accurate, matching it with the purchase order, matching it with the paid invoices, looking at your narrative that you wrote up concerning the process for inventory, equipment disposal, and loss prevention, all of that. So it doesn't take the time away from when they come on the site to actually look at the equipment. So you're going to email all of that information to your assigned TA. Then the bottom part will be signed by the TA when they are at your site. So they will not have a signature or anything emailed to you. It will actually be done in person. At the very bottom, the signature of the LEA or CBO representative will need to be signed at the very bottom as well. I would say the signature of the LEA or CBO representative can also be your program director. Okay, but because they're representing the LEA as far as making sure this inventory is correct, and it will be dated the date that you actually come in to review this information. That'll be reviewed by the TA. So please note, this is to be done for each year. So the information I just talked about was, let's just say, was ABC school um, the Bama um, for the Bama business, and they are the actual subgrantee. But they had multiple sites, and each site had equipment at each site. Then that needs to be done for each site. If they have multiple sites, but only one um, site has equipment, let's just say they had three sites and only one site, site one, had equipment, but the other two sites did not purchase any equipment, then the other two sites inventory will say equipment was not purchased and that's it. But guess what? It still has to be signed off. So keep that in mind. You want to make sure also that each year at the very top is completed for each year of the grant. So if that's the case, then that should be completed for years 2022, 2023, then year 2023, 2024. And if you bought um, equipment for year three, which would be 2024, 2025, you would do so for that as well. But if you did not buy any equipment for 2024, 2025, you still complete this form and you just indicate on the form equipment was not purchased. That is documentation to show that you did not purchase any equipment and it has to still be signed off. So please follow those directives so that you can make sure that you do have everything in alignment as it pertains to equipment. Equipment transfer form. Here are the reasons why you should or should not complete this form that is on this slide. So for number one, when you should complete this form, it will be due because the equipment will remain at the school because there will be a different out of school time program that'll be offered at that particular school or site. Another reason why you will complete this form would be because the equipment is going to be transferred to another 21st century program that is within the same district of the current site. It's very important to understand because we do have some CBOs that have several different sites but may be in a different district. So you can only transfer to another 21st century program the equipment if it is within the same district of the current site. The next reason why you would use the equipment transfer form would be because if the school that is currently a 21st century site is a Title I school, then it will stay at that school because it is a Title I school. But if the site is not a Title I school, then it has to be moved to another Title I school within the same district. It cannot go to another Title I school outside of the district. And that is applicable after number one and number two is not applicable to them, then you would do the Title I status. So keep that in mind. So you have to go through each one of these processes before you make your determination. So if I chose number three as the reason why the equipment is going to stay at the site because it's a Title I school, then that means that there's not going to be another out of school time program offered at the same site that currently has a 21st century grant. That also means that there's not another 21st century program in the district. So it's going to stay at that site because it's a Title I school. So keep that in mind when you're getting ready to do your transfer form. And last, the only time that you will say that this form is not applicable to you is because if this site did not have or purchase any equipment using cohort 16, so it's not applicable. Or if you were awarded and you know that you're going to be awarded the new cohort 26, or the new cohort 25 summer, and you're going to keep that equipment at that site and they have been awarded, then that's when you would keep it there and you would put not applicable. But other than that, everyone should have some kind of rationale as to how the equipment is going to be transferred, and it should match one of these areas as outlined. So let's get ready to discuss the form just to make sure that you understand the expectations when you're completing it. Now we're ready to discuss or review the equipment inventory transfer form. This form is to be utilized by programs whose federal funding is coming to an end. Please attach copies of equipment inventory lists for each year of the 21st Century Grant, which delineates equipment purchases and acquisitions. These forms must be submitted to the technical assistance or TA at the time of transfer. Right where it says subgrantee, we want to make sure that we place the name of either the LEA or the CBO who was the actual holder of the grant. The site that's going to be transferring the equipment will be the site that currently holds the 21st Century Cohort 16 grant. The receiving site will be the site in which who is to receive the equipment. Even if the reason for transferring the equipment is because there's going to be um, another 21st century grant and you're going to be hosting it at that school or at the same site, or even if the receiving site is another 21st century grant and it's going to another site, that's what you would put there. If the site is going to be uh, the Title I school is the rationale for it and it's going to still stay at the site, you're still going to complete this and just say the name of the school because you're showing that you have documentation to support that you have actually transferred this equipment that was purchased with federal dollars to the appropriate site. And then the scheduled dates of visit. This should be a projected date of when you plan to have your visit um, to the site that's going to receive the equipment. This can be a projected date, or go ahead and communicate and let them know that this is the date that you're going to come and transfer the equipment over to them. The type of equipment, we're going to go through that same process. Put in the type of equipment, the fiscal year of the purchase based on the grant year that you made the purchase, the serial number of those of that particular equipment. You're also going to put the property number that was assigned by the LEA or the CBO. Remember we talked about how you have a number system where you have it set up. Um, for when it is up under you as the subgrantee, but that's where you would put that number there. So those are two different numbers. The serial numbers from the manufacturing company and the property number would be from the number that you had assigned it when you held it as an LEA or as a CBO. The approximate cost of the equipment and the date of transfer to the schools or schools served. So all of that needs to be completed. If you do not have an equipment that needs to be transferred because you have been awarded another 21st century grant or because you did not make any equipment purchases using 21st century funds for cohort 16, then you need to indicate as such on this form. When the TA comes in for their visit, then the signatures showing that they have received this information from you has been signed and dated. However, the very bottom signature is not to be signed until it is actually delivered to the receiving site. So the person that's receiving this information is going to sign at the last signature of receiving school, and they need to indicate their title and their date. So there's going to be a different date because, of course, you're going to provide this information to the receiving school, the date that they actually receive it. And we do know that our grant does not end until September 30th. And so your equipment probably will not be transferred until after that date. So please keep that in mind when you're getting ready to do your transfer of equipment. When we're about to transfer the equipment to the receiving site, there are some things we want to make sure that you keep in mind. Communication is very important, and you want to collaborate with the receiving site, making them fully aware the amount of equipment that's going to be coming and that this is a requirement for the process of it. Talk about what's the best time, where you're going to be actually bringing it to. So it's really important that when you get ready to actually physically transfer the equipment to a different site, that it has been communicated and that they know that it is coming. We don't want to show up on a different site with equipment and they have no idea of what is going on. So you want to communicate this information to them in enough time so that they can prepare appropriately. Remember that whoever's receiving the equipment, that they have a representative there to sign for it, and that last signature that is required is received the day it is delivered, and it should be reflective of that date. When you actually deliver the equipment, you want to make sure that all copies are given to all the parties who are going to be receiving the equipment the same day that it is transferred. You don't want to do this at a later date. You want to go ahead and have copies made for them, or if you want to sign, especially the transfer form, you want to go ahead and have that signed and make sure you get a copy of when it was actually signed and dated as well. Once you have gotten a copy of all of this information and it has actually the transition has taken place, please provide us the final copy of your transfer equipment form to your TA so that they can send it to us so that we can file it here at the state level. When it comes to other purchases that are outside of equipment, we want to make sure that you understand that as a subgrantee, you're not allowed to just keep the curricular books or any kits that you've purchased with 21st Century funds or keep them at your place of business if you are a CBO. You must make sure that you still adhere to the guidelines for transferring equipment. So although you're not placing um, non equipment such as books or kits on the form, you do want to make sure that the schools that need this information or purchases do follow those students and so or goes to the correct sites as outlined in our guidance for equipment transfers. You want to do the same thing with these materials. So it's very important that we're honest in making sure that we don't hold on to anything that was purchased, especially if we are a CBO, because it was purchased for student usage, and we don't want to keep that in those materials at our business or even at our school if we do not have another out of school time program or another 21st century grant that's going to be implemented, or if it's not a Title I school, because the items are going to stay there. So if it's going to stay there, of course, we would leave everything as is and just show that it's staying there. But we just want to continue to follow those guidelines even when it comes to other purchases. Now let's talk about the actual day of your site visit with your TA. They're going to come in specifically to do the following that are listed on this particular screen. We want to talk about housing and security of equipment. When they come in, they're going to look at just how diligent you have done to make sure that the equipment is kept in a manner that will keep it from getting stolen or broken or damaged by the weather or anything of that sort. So you want to make sure that it's housed and you have security for the equipment that has been purchased with the 21st century funds. Making sure that all the equipment has been appropriately labeled, and you want to ensure also that any paid equipment matches the inventory, and we can show that by having our documentation. When the TA comes to view the site, they're going to go and request to look at your inventory like we spoke before, but they're going to already have in mind what inventory they want to look at or what pieces of equipment they want to look at. It will not be communicated to you before the day of the visit. So please make sure that you recognize that they're going to select pieces of equipment from your inventory list that you have already emailed to them. They are to select 3 items from the list, and those 3 items need to also match the purchase orders and the paid invoices to show your due diligence with accurate record keeping. And during that time, that's when the signatures will be secured. So we are doing our best to allow our technical advisors handle site visits. However, if there is a reflection of poor inventory, not done in the manner in which we've previously discussed, then that means the State Department would have to come out and actually do a visit. So what would be some of those reasons for one of us or our team having to come out and visit? it would be due to the fact that your inventory forms were not done correctly. If you were unable to locate any of the equipment that they request on the day of arrival, or if they noticed that when they looked into the inventory room or how you were housing the equipment, if it wasn't properly labeled, or if there was, poor, um, there wasn't a good safe space for where the equipment is being housed, that will be a area of concern. And any other concerns that are communicated to us from the TA will cause for us to have to come and do an additional visit, because we want to make sure that the inventory has been done correctly. So let's make sure that we have everything properly done so that this would not have to be the situation. If it is the situation, then we're here to make sure we clean it up, get it straight, so that you can close out in a proper manner and still be able to receive funds. Close out checklist. Now, this is the checklist that the TA or ALSDE specialist will use on the day of closeout, and also signatures will be secured during that day. But we also wanted to make sure you were aware of what is going to be used so that you can use it as a guide when you're doing your checkout, your closeout process, and you can use it as a checklist to just see, have I covered all aspects that are going to be used when it comes to closeout. So we're going to look at that checklist so that you'll know exactly what we're looking at when we come out for a visit. Alrighty, this is the actual checklist that the TA will actually complete. It is not for you to complete and to submit to the TA, but you can use it as a guideline just to make sure that you've covered all of the aspects of the closeout process for cohort 16. If we go inside of the table, these are all of the things that we've talked about previously. We've talked about making sure that we've completed the closeout form. Did you complete the narrative and included those areas within the narrative that are outlined within the table? And was it signed by the program director and sent to the ALSDE specialist? Also, the inventory form. All of the different parts that are on that form are listed here under this section, but we want to make sure that you look at the very bottom of the last bulleted area that has a dot next to it, right up under the disposal method. If you have any lost items that are listed on your inventory, please make sure you have a copy of the police report, to be along with your inventory, or with your to be able to give to your TA when they ask for, if they select something, then you need to make sure that if it's not there, it is because it was lost, and you say, here's my police report to show that we did our due diligence. If it was stolen, the same way, you have a police report to show that the stolen items were reported, and if anything was transferred, or is going to be transferred, then you have that information as well, and the TA will check off on that. So do note that if there are any items that were lost or stolen, you should have a copy of a police report to be able to give or attach with your inventory form as well. The TA is also going to make sure that the inventory is accurate, it is completed with all of the areas that need to be completed. And in that grayed out box, that's just a reminder for them to make sure that those things were done and received. And at the very bottom, it says compliance monitoring. We do know that this is a cohort 16, and you had your compliance monitoring in year 2, which was last year. But if you had to provide any additional documents, um, they're going to ask, is that the case? Did you receive any communication to us about that? And if so, they will put yes. um, I'm sorry, they will put yes that you had received documentation, but you do know your date of when you're going to have it completed. If you don't know and you know you have to complete some information, they're going to ask you, well, when are you going to complete the information? Have you completed it? And we'll go a little bit more into details on another slide about that, but just note that that is on there and they're going to ask you that question. This information will not be signed off by the program director or the TA or LSDE specialist until the date of the visit. The only time the ALSDE specialist will complete this form is if there had to be a do-over based on the outcome of when the TA was out for a visit with your closeout. Compliance monitoring. Even though you completed your compliance monitoring year 2, if you were a subgrantee that needed to have additional documents submitted this year based off of the recommendations from last year or any findings, then you would need to make sure that it has been addressed and uploaded into Cognia for fiscal year 2025 to show that you have closed out, because compliance monitoring is a part of the closeout process. But if you were in good standing, then you would not have to worry about that. But this is only for those who had any recommendations or findings, and they would need to make sure that they have completed that process and have uploaded into the documents into Cognia for fiscal year 2025. Returning funds. Because you are closing out and you are in cohort 16, if you are approved for the new grant summer cohort 25 or cohort 26 and you have any funds that were not spent, we usually have carryover, but that would not be applicable to cohort 16 because you are closing out. So you will not carry over any funds into a new grant. So what's next as it pertains to your technical advisor or your assigned TA? You're going to make sure that you email all equipment forms to your assigned TA before your site visit. You're also going to include with that email your purchase orders and paid invoices for the equipment that is on your inventory equipment forms. And then you're going to create a plan to visit each site with your assigned TA so that they can see the purchased equipment that was purchased using cohort 16 funds. If a site does not have any purchased equipment for cohort 16, then you will not need to plan for a visit to that site. You're only going to take your TA to the site or to each site that has equipment that has been purchased with cohort 16. If you do not have any sites that purchased any equipment using cohort 16 funds, then there will be no site visits. So remember, that's the only reason why the TA will go visit any sites for during closeout will be because they need to see the equipment that was purchased using the grants funds. Here are some documents that are going to be collected as well as signed off during your visit. And some of that you will have already sent to your TA for preview, but the final collection and sign off will take place during your visit. The ALSDE approved narrative will be submitted to your TA. You want to make sure that the equipment inventory with the purchase orders and pay invoices for cohort 16 are given to your TA. You want to also make sure that those signatures have been provided as well as your transfer of equipment form. And you want to make sure that those purchase orders and pay invoices are with that as well. If you had any equipment that was lost or stolen, provide the police reports to give to your TA during the site visit. And also, you will get the closeout form that needs to be collected and signed off by your TA, and you will get a copy of that, but this is when it is actually collected during the visit. And then lastly, you will receive a copy of the closeout checklist. You may have used it as a guide for yourself, but it will be actually completed by the TA, and any signatures that are needed will be collected during the site visit. Documents not completed. I know this is not going to happen, but we have to talk about it just in case it does happen, because if it does, it is going to be an issue. Um, it will be an issue because it's going to place you at risk with future grants, even if you were already told that you were awarded the 21st Century Cohort Summer Grant or for Summer 25, or even if you were awarded the 26th grant. We reserve the right to be able to say, based off of your inability to close out properly or not have equipment done properly, has put you at risk. So we may have to go back and revisit being awarded a grant if this is the case, because closing out shows your due diligence in making sure that you have taken care of equipment and have followed those guidelines. In addition, if the closeout did not go well, then and that is to include documentation not done correctly or missing, um, whatever the feedback was from the TA, from your assigned TA, then we have to schedule an additional closeout process through the state level. So please keep that in mind. Um, we don't want to have to do this, but we have to do our due diligence in making sure that as the gatekeepers of the funds that you all have received, that everything has been done in decent and in order, and that we have our documentation to support that. Record keeping. This is so important. Even when it comes to your compliance monitoring documents from last year that you completed, you want to make sure that you have everything stored in a proper place that can be readily pulled if asked for. And we also want to make sure that you receive a copy of all the documents that you received from your closeout. Keep them on file to show that you had your closeout process. And make sure your equipment, all documents are stored in a safe space and can be easily accessed if need be. This slide was included for forms. All of the forms that was reviewed today, please make sure that you note that you see the year 2025 on them to make sure you're using the correct forms, because some of the items on the forms have been changed. And if you submit and do all of that work on the wrong form, you'll have to redo it and do it on the correct form. So please use what we have. Don't reinvent anything, but follow the guidelines on the forms. These are live links that will take you directly to each of the forms that were discussed in this presentation, as well as to help with your guideline through the process. So once again, make sure that you look at the form and you see the year 2025 so that you know that that's the updated or the most recently updated form due to information that has been brought to our attention that needed to be placed on closeout forms, and to make sure that we follow the guidelines of the grant. Here we have the closeout schedule for all of our subgrantees who are in cohort 16. I want you to know that we are asking that you pay attention to using the correct schedule because it has been revised. It was revised on April 7th of 2025. So look in the left corner when you are looking at the schedule to make sure that you're using the correct schedule. Also, we want to make sure that you note the dates primarily are written in stone. However, if you have some kind of special situation where you need to change a date, we're asking that you notify your assigned ALSD specialist or TA if there is a conflict. But other than that, we're really going to stick to these dates based on what we know that is coming down the pipeline as far as other requirements for you all, especially those who will be joining us as a new cohort. And so we want to make sure we give everyone enough time to get everything done in a timely manner so that you can get appropriate feedback. So if you are in a situation where you just really cannot um, do the date that has been assigned to you, please reach out and let someone know as soon as possible so that we can make some corrections and get that handled. But for the most part, we are going to stick to these dates unless absolutely necessary to change. So here's the schedule that I referenced to earlier. Just want to go over it so that you can understand and know how to read it correctly. Just note that you have a column where it says narrative is emailed to your ALSD specialist. That is the last date. You can get it in before that date, but that is the actual last date to get that information in to your assigned ALSD specialist. And then you have a date for when you email those documents, such as the inventory and all the other documents that are going to be previewed prior to the site visit. Those are those documents that go to the TA. So they can have the same dates if you have that situation going on, but just note that there's one document going to an LSDE specialist, and then there's other documents that's going to the TA. And then the last column that has due dates, those are dates that you're going to have your actual site visit for closeout. That's right next to it. So go through there and make sure that those dates are going to meet your needs. And like I said earlier, if for some reason it is a serious conflict, then you need to reach out to your assigned LSDE and your TA to notify us. But the due date, even for the TA, if you can get your documents done before your due date, then go ahead on and send it to your TA, excuse me. But we just want to make sure that you know that is the last date to get it in, and we want to make sure that you are aware so that we can make sure that everything runs smoothly. We have also identified your assigned LSDE person as well as your TA. If you have any questions pertaining to the presentation on the closeout, please note that we will have virtual office hours for you to bring your questions on April the 15th. We'll offer it two different times so that if you're able to just do a morning, then you can come at 9:30, or if you can only do an afternoon on that date, then you will come at 3:30. Or if you want to come to both sessions, that's fine. But we will open and make ourselves available for any questions that you may have concerning closeouts. In the meantime, if you have any questions prior to that date or even after the date, you're welcome to give us a call in federal programs at the number that has been provided for you. Thank you, program directors, for dedicating your time to attend this closeout training session. Your commitment to the success of the 21st Century Cohort 16 grant is invaluable, and we appreciate your efforts in ensuring excellence in this program. As we conclude, please remember that any questions or clarifications will be addressed during the virtual office hours scheduled for April the 15th, with sessions at 9:30 a.m. and 3:30 p.m. We encourage you to participate and bring any concerns or inquiries. Additionally, since this training is a mandatory requirement for all program directors of the Cohort 16 grant, it's crucial to verify your attendance. To complete this process, kindly ensure that you've watched the entire session and submit verification by completing the QR code provided. Thank you again for your active participation and dedication. Your role makes a significant impact, and we look forward to continuing this journey together.